All right, so thank you for having me here. I'm very excited to be doing the closing keynote for this great event. I actually flew here in 3 flights from Austin, Texas. I was speaking there at a project management conference just a couple of days ago, and I caught a cold, which I hope is not Ebola. If it is, sorry. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about Agile for fixed bid projects and why it's possible and why it's important and why you guys should think about it and the things that we've learned. So I'll start by telling you guys a little bit about what kind of company we are because it relates to the things that we've learned as we've grown and why kind of we've come to use Agile or Scrum specifically, okay? So what we are is really defined by my parents. That's my dad, very stylish glasses. He doesn't wear them anymore, but so my dad's actually a physicist. He works at KTU and he teaches in the atom energetics school, and my mom's an art teacher. So when I grew up, I kind of got a messed up brain where I'm a blend of two. I do a little bit of artistic and a little bit of engineering. So when we founded the company, which was kind of 6 years ago, we decided that that's what we were going to do. We're going to combine the artistic with the engineering piece, and we were going to build great looking and great functioning software, okay? So we do stuff like, we do e-commerce, really large scale e-commerce, we do responsive web design, we do enterprise mobility solutions for our clients and for healthcare, manufacturing, and so on and so forth. But I'm not here to tell you about what we do and who we are. I wanted just to give you some background because we've grown in 6 years to 110 people. We're a United States-based company, and it was founded by 5 Lithuanians, actually 5 people from Kaunas. And we are 2 years in a row now, one of 5,000 fastest growing privately held companies in the United States. So for a Lithuanian group, not a bad achievement to kind of register on that scale. We work across 3 offices. So we're in Chicago, and then we're in Vilnius and Kaunas. We're expanding to the 2 shores in the United States as well. And our clients are scattered across the world. They're US clients typically, but they're scattered all over the place. So well, I'm telling you this because that introduces certain complexities in how you deal with project management and in general how you build projects. Okay, so let's start by saying this one word that we all know really well. What's the word? Waterfall. All right, good, waterfall. It's great, looks fantastic on paper. This is how we manage projects for, I don't know, 3, 4 years maybe? Or at least this is how we thought project management should work. You know, nice, pretty picture with greenery, and this is how it actually works. Right? So we got burned a little bit. Now we work in a consultative environment, right? So we work with clients on projects, and typically we need to acquire these clients, and it's not internal products, it's something we build and hand off, right? But on a different note, like why would you even want to do fixed bid? And the reason is that a lot of the times there's no other way to get business because a client comes to you. It could be an internal client, it could be an external client. They come to you and they say, you know what, we have $500,000, this is what we need to do. And you either take that or you don't. And sometimes as a growing company, you don't have the luxury of coming in and saying, no, all we do is time and materials, we're cool, we're agile, we're going to ship shit every 2 weeks, we're going to be awesome. Like, no, because that's way too dangerous, right, for them, because they don't know how good you are. So what happens is, and the way we looked at it, right, is you want to transition a client from a fixed bid to an agile, like a fully agile product shop or mentality, let's say. So what we want to do is we want to build trust over time, and that's typically agile, for me at least from what I've seen. It's all about building trust for the client, and then when that trust mounts, then you become really, really great. You operate the way agile is meant to operate without a lot of the constraints that come from fixed bid type methodologies, okay? All right, so the talk today then, what we're going to do is we're going to look at 3 kind of different, sections of this talk. We need to understand how do we qualify for Agile, and that involves certain things. Then we need to look at how we manage process and the project itself as we're working in Agile, in both fixed bid and not fixed bid. And then, we should measure performance, because if we're just doing Agile but we're not measuring performance, well, it's not that great. Okay, all right, so let's look at the first part. There are 2 things that I always like to think about. There's qualifying the project and qualifying your team. okay? So we're gonna start out by saying, what does it take, like what type of project should be run in Agile, and what are the team requirements? Because as we were growing, we tried to adapt Agile multiple times, and with varying degrees of success, to be honest. I mean, we tried it, and I'll tell you guys later what we failed on, but I figured qualification is a good place to start. So, if you look at a typical Agile team, this is how we're structured internally. We'll have a product owner that's essentially a project manager, right? Then you have an engineering team that has front-end, architects, senior devs, QA folks, and then you have the usability, UI, UX side, where the folks design interactions and interfaces, okay? Now, looking at this type of team, this doesn't mean that everyone on this team is allocated 100% to this project. Like QA typically is shared between a couple of projects. But still, even with some of these people being part-time on a single project, you're looking at 5 to 7 full-time employees to run a proper product team, okay? Because this is what a team looks like. And what that means is that they actually burn a lot of hours any given week. So actually, if your project is 1,000 hours, you got no room to iterate, son. You got to do waterfall, and there's no other way. And actually, waterfall works for small projects. Not a lot of hours, low complexity. You can document the crap out of it at the beginning, and then just step-by-step design, prototype, build, QA at the end, right? You got to love QA at the end. But then, if you have something a little more complex, well, then kind of building documentation at the beginning of a project for something that's going to take you half a year to build is a disaster, right? So what we did, we calculated, and we said, okay, so number of team members, let's say 5, they work 32 hours a week. That's a total of 160 hours a week, 320 hours in a sprint, 2 weeks, right? That 320 hours, that burns like a third of your budget. There's like sprint 1, sprint 2, okay, we're done now. That's not Agile, right? So that's why we said, qualifying the project, size of the project is very important. When you're thinking of adapting Agile and looking at your portfolio of work that you're doing, look at size of project. Because when we started, we didn't, and it was tough. I mean, we tried to iterate on tiny projects. Okay. And then, obviously, the Agile stuff, that's a lot of hours. And there's another side effect of that. It costs a lot of money, right? That's from Breaking Bad. Great show. So building software, or building kind of enterprise software, complex software, is an expensive affair, right? And what that means is that you need to qualify excuse me, making chicken sounds. You need to qualify the client and the team, right? So the client has to have enough money, and then you have to look at the team. Now, we kind of did a little bit of analysis in terms of different companies, and like, what is the size that you should be to run Agile? And as we were growing, we tried to do it at different sizes. And so I grouped them, and I made these numbers up, but I kind of grouped them into, you're self-employed, you're a freelancer, then there's a boutique size, mid-size, and then large company, with that one guy is probably running to jump out of a window. No offense, large companies. We're trying to be one, so it's okay. Now, what you need to do is you need to realize that there's certain constraints based on the size, because when you're building out the team, you have certain limitations in terms of how many different professionals can you get into one product team when you're small, because you need diverse skill sets, right, to build out a proper product team. You need a front end, you need back end, you need QA, and so on. So when you're a small shop, it gets a little bit tough to actually have that many big, diverse set of skill sets to build those product teams. Now, so when we grew, this was actually an actual step in our growth process. We grew to, I think, probably 60 people or 50 people in the company. And this is what our structure was. So we had teams that were based on practice within the company. So there was a design department, there was a development department, there was a QA department, and so on and so forth. And what this is good for is that you can have really, really deep level of expertise within the department, because all of these people are sitting together. Projects go in waterfall, so like design gets the project and they keep working on it and they can polish it up and stuff like that. So there are benefits, but the problem is that there's very poor collaboration across. And you can't really get developers to tell designers how to do things because they're separate. They're in a separate step of the process. They don't collaborate. There's no ideation going on. There's also a difficulty adapting to change because you're following a rigid step-by-step process, a linear process versus something like Agile. So we got to this, we tried this, and kind of to go back to you guys to show you, this was our first office in Bensonville in Chicago. The furniture, the used furniture cost us, I think, $200. The first coffee machine we bought cost us $500, so we had our priorities straight. And that's where we started. Now we have 3 offices, and the team's pretty big. And we learned a lot along the way. So then you get to this other section. You get to mid-size, and that's what I call us now. We're mid-size. When you get bigger, you start seeing kind of process-driven patterns of how you should behave or how you should do projects. Process is getting better. And you get some scalability. You get a little bit of independence. You have functional teams now. So instead of having those teams that are based on practice, you actually can have teams that are functional, meaning they're a blended team and they can kind of operate as a little SWAT team. They can do stuff on their own, right? Solve problems on their own. There's good cross-pollination of knowledge, too, at this point, because they're kind of solving problems together. You know the Agile theory. I'm not going to repeat that. There are some challenges, of course. As you grow, we had to deal with cultural changes in the company, right? We sensed that at some point in time we had to interview employees and find out how we were doing as we were growing because the organization changes as it grows. There are certain things that become a little bit different, and sometimes not all people are on board. So there's some things that you need to resolve. You know, hiring and pipeline for new projects, those are challenging because now you have more mouths to feed and worry about. But at this point, now you get to this type of structure, and I talked about functional teams. So the way we structure ours, and these are not our real names, but the way we have the teams structured is these are functional teams. They consist of, you know, designers, front-end developers, QAs, backends, architects, leads, and so on and so forth. And multiple teams are actually serviced by a single product owner. Now, in our organization, our Scrum Masters float, so they don't necessarily are aligned with one team. We have kind of like Scrum coaches that move around the organization and get the teams up to speed. But product owner is the representative that kind of represents the well-being of the client, the goals, the mission of the project, but also advocates for us and controls scope and all these other things. So we have functional teams mapped to multiple product owners. And then in addition to the side, because these are, remember, these are kind of like, they're deployed in the field, right? They're solving problems out there. We have a support organization defined as well. And the support organization, don't think of support as supporting, you know, existing products. This is team support. So there's different roles that make sure that our process and our expertise get deeper and deeper all the time. So we have, you know, all the directors of engineering, director of UI, UX, and so on and so forth. Those are folks in the support organization, and they help these guys get better process, get better tools. They're doing research, R&D in the field, looking at new technologies, Elasticsearch, Node, and so on and so forth. Okay. So now we kind of identified the size of the team and kind of the size of the project, right? And so those are 2 qualifiers that we say that's where you need to be if you want to adapt Agile in your organization. And we try to do it without those variables, and it just didn't work. In fact, if someone would have told us these limitations, we would have saved us a lot of money, because we tried a lot and failed. This is from the show Space. It's a British sitcom. Really, really terrific if you guys are into nerdy things like comic books and pop culture. All right. So the next step is managing process and the project, okay? All right, so I promise there's still funny gifts ahead, so stay tuned. In fact, one coming up really soon. So process, so let's think about Agile and process, and the cornerstone of doing Agile is trust. Because if your client, whether internal or external, if they don't trust you, you can't really do what Agile is meant to do. Because there's a lot of kind of trust involved in letting people just figure the problems out in a room and then give you deliverables every 2 weeks. There's an investment that the client has to make and so on and so forth. And, you know, everything we do is based on trust. And the typical outcome of hiring a technology company and doing software products and stuff is like this. Clients get screwed. We're over budget. Oh. We're late. Right? I'll just have this running for a little bit. Yeah. So clients, or in general, like people in the industry, are now trained to not trust software development because it's always late, it's always over budget. So that's why I say that trust is a cornerstone, because you need to build that trust up with your client. So when I talk about working in fixed bid mode and then getting to a model where you're actually operating the way that an Agile shop should operate, I mean that should be, your fixed bid is kind of your start of starting to build trust, and then as trust builds, you can start doing it without some of the constraints that a fixed bid model implies. Okay, so we know trust is one thing. Now, whenever we start a project, there's this preconception that everyone knows what Agile is, right? We're doing Agile every day. I speak Agile here, your clients don't, both internal and external. If they're not in IT or in development, they have not the slightest clue what Agile is. We were doing this project for a customer, building an e-commerce system, pretty complex one, international, multi-currency, all this good stuff. And as we were building it, we were iterating over small components of the functionality. And we were like, well, this is the cart. We wireframed out the cart functionality, the UX. We're like, check it out. It's pretty cool, right? Nice, Ajax posting happening and stuff. It's all refreshing. And the client's like, what is this? I'm like, well, it's your cart. I'm like, no, but what does it look like? We're like, well, we can't show you. We're just focusing on one piece. I'm like, well, I can't get buy-in from our stakeholders because I can't see what the whole website is going to look like, so I can't sign off on this. So the problem with that is that the client signed off and said, yes, we'll do this in Agile. They have the slightest clue of what Agile is. So your responsibility is to train them, because if you don't, this is how they do acceptance. Right? Happened many times. We're like, here's a function set. Check it out, test it, give us feedback. I'm like, well, okay. And then in 2 weeks, we ship another set, and they haven't done the first one, and then it just mounts and mounts and mounts and mounts, and at the end of the day, you're over budget. It's not what the client wanted, and it's a disaster. Okay. Now, what we've also seen is that there's a correlation between knowledge of Agile and the industry that the client's in, and the cost of your project management. So anytime you get onboard a client and you're working with a client, consider looking at what industry they're coming from, what they do, and do they really know Agile? Because that will directly impact the cost of project management. So your allocation of your product owner or your scrum master or whoever else is going to double or triple on your estimate because they don't know how to operate with an Agile. And sometimes you can do training and get them on board and kind of improve it, but a lot of the times that cost is going to be directly proportional to how little they know about Agile. Now, in our process, so let's get back to, I kind of talked a little bit about trust, talked about training clients, right, getting them on board. Now, this is how we do projects now, or kind of when a new client comes to us, we need to get them on board with Agile and teach them how to do this. So we need to build trust initially. And the way we've seen this succeed is if we kind of get them on board for a small prototyping project. And think of prototyping as ideation, a little bit of design, a little bit of front-end development to build out functional prototypes for whatever application or system you're building. Now, it's unlikely you're going to be able to do the whole thing, right? Whatever, if it's a big project. But if you can get them to sign off and say, you know what, just give us $10,000. We're going to spend 2 weeks on site with you guys. We're going to bring in a product owner, a front-end developer, a designer. We're going to play with you what it means to work with us and show you the product that comes out of it. So for that money, not only will you actually get some work done, there's going to be a deliverable that you can show to your team and get buy-in from your internal stakeholders. Now, this, again, works internally and externally in organizations, depending what your clients are. So we'll do this rapid prototyping session with them. It can be short and can be a little bit longer if it's bigger. And then at the end of that, we give them a functional prototype. And they can take that to their stakeholders, their CEO, CTO, or marketing organization. And they can show it to them, and they can say, well, these guys, they got it. They understood what we do. We sat in a room, and we threw ideas on a board. We used sticky notes. They were color sticky notes. Great. They love it. I don't know why, but they do. And then, so assuming that you do this rapid prototyping thing nicely, and your people are not assholes, and your client likes you, you then get to do the big project, because now you have trust, right? Over that period, you built up trust, and they're like, yeah, you guys can develop this. Obviously, you know what you're doing. And then the proper sprint starts. So this is an example of one of the projects that we're working on. It's a prototype of an internal wealth management system that we're building for a bank in Florida. And what it does is it allows them to actually click through the prototype. There's no back end here. It's just a responsive UI, some functionality built out, just some interactions that are driven by JavaScript. So they can kind of play around with the interface, get a sense of what that prototype does. Okay? So again, test it on devices, do all that other good stuff. So that is the shippable deliverable that they get at the end. Now again, that's much easier to pitch that and get them to buy in on that and try out Agile versus you telling them, no, time and material is 6 months, $1 million, okay? All right, now, so let's say that we convinced them, right? They bought into this. They're like, you guys are charlatans, but I'm gonna give it a try. What we do after that is we take them through a pre-project, or some people call it like a -1 sprint or 0 sprint, right? And we take them through a couple or many different steps that kind of, again, allow us to prep better for the kickoff of the project. Now, again, assume that here we're working in a fixed bid kind of platform, right? They're going to give us a fixed amount of money to do this. We're not going to get that full buy-in yet, because they want to try a project with us. So we're still operating in a mentality of fixed bid. So what we do at the beginning, we give them a ballpark estimate. And we tell them that this estimate will be refined later on. That estimate is based on the prototype we built. And then we start our R&D. So we'll get on site, we'll do R&D with them, we'll do research spikes into integrations, right? So if there's any APIs or systems that we depend on, we'll kind of test them out, make sure data's coming in. We do Agile training for them. So we'll actually sit in the room and we'll tell them what Agile is. We'll do little games, we'll play with little tennis balls and stuff like that. We'll do story mapping sessions where we will actually take requirements and storyboard them out on the wall and allow them to put ideas on the wall and show them how that kind of affects the scope of the project. We'll groom the backlog, and then we'll re-estimate again. So that's another kind of, you did prototyping, but now you're doing another R&D kind of stretch to prep for that initial kickoff, okay? And this is an actual picture of the team working. So, this is a storyboarding exercise where they're mapping out functionality to different epics. And during this, the client is participating. We have them actually write down on the stickies and post it on the wall and show them, because remember, you came in this room starting with an RFP, right? They gave you a document and said, we want feature A, B, C. And you said, okay, that's cool, but let us show you this. And stickies, right? And then they start writing new ideas because they didn't talk to all of their stakeholders. They didn't talk to executives. They just kind of assumed they need this. And then you get more people in the room and they start ideating, and then the scope just blows up. You started out with a project this big, now it's this big, right? The wall is full of notes. Our clients will love this software. It's always like that. But what happens then, remember I said we do backlog grooming prior to this? So we start out with a backlog, right? And there's an estimate for this backlog. And then they just did the story mapping session. And all of a sudden, that backlog is changing now. There's new stuff. There's other stuff that's getting kicked off from the bottom. And all of a sudden, the client's like, so software changes as you build it. And we're like, yes, that's why Agile is important. And then there's like this realization in their eyes, like, yeah, I get it, right? So again, training, building a trust throughout the process, that's important. Still realizing it. All right. Now that you taught them that software is going to change, we can do this complete, log down of scope, time, schedule, and money, right? You can't lock everything in because you guys are going to change it on us. You need to teach them what Chrome is. right? So another thing that clients don't understand typically is what is Chrome on the web, right? And if you're like any other client, you want to Chrome all the things. That's a disservice to that vehicle. I love that car, but it looks like crap with chromed up. So what we do is we run through a couple of different scenarios for their story for their stories of what Chrome is and how Chrome can be identified, can be avoided, and how that impacts the scope and the cost of what they're going to get, right? So we say that a user can search the product library, and you guys are all technical here, so you know what I mean. You can do autocompletes, you can do fault tolerance, you can implement fancy search algorithms, all this other stuff. But if I just wrote that in the user story, it doesn't mean that you get all of this. And they don't get it. So you need to teach them that you can't do Chrome for everything because your lower priority items are going to just get knocked off that backlog. So very important. Now, in terms of the kickoff, so in the kickoff, it's very, very important to set ground rules. And whenever we do a kickoff with our clients, we kind of walk through the stuff that we covered in the Agile training. We walk through the backlog. We walk through assumptions. The original RFP, we compare what the product is actually now versus what they asked for originally, things like that. And we tell them, and actually this is a true story, we tell them, if you guys are not going to do acceptance on us in 5 business days, we're going to start penalizing you for not giving us acceptance on a sprint. And we say that by saying, you know what, if you don't give us acceptance, we're going to bill you for idle time that the development team is going to incur at the rate of blah, 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 right? So you calculate whatever the team is, and you say, you're going to start being hit with idle time charges. No one's going to agree with that. We put that in the contract, like, here, sign this. Like, what, are you crazy? We're not going to do that. Like, well, if you guys are not going to do acceptance, this is a problem. So, but you have to, when you think about client education, you have to preemptively think of things that you can kind of really punch into their minds so that they think about them throughout the project and they don't make those mistakes. Now, we never really anticipate for them to sign a contract like that where we're going to bill them for idle time. That'd be fantastic, but it doesn't work. But if you start out with it, like if your contract is completely obnoxious, like it's all to your benefit and none to your clients, at least through the negotiations process and through the education process, you can get them to a point where they're kind of like, they're a tame kitty, okay? So you got to set some ground rules when you start out. Now, in the kickoff process, so when we sit down, we get all the stakeholders, and we typically request from the client that there's going to be only one individual who we're going to be accountable to. So have you guys heard of a term, design by committee? Anyone? No? All right. Design by committee is when you get the amount of people in this room all expressing their opinions. Opinions are like everyone's has them, right? You know what word was missing? Yeah. So the problem by design by committee is because you can't control it. There's too many people in the room. There's a lot of stakeholders and CEOs, and they're tearing their shirts off. This is my website. It's going to be this way. So we always say that in the kickoff, we want one person who's going to be the decision maker for your organization, and we're going to only take orders from them. And if you guys can't do that, again, in that contract, you say, we're not going to do this. Then we also do a little bit of ideation. We create the roadmap for the versions of the product. So usually, up till this point, you guys started with an RFP, limited scope. Then you did your prototype. Then you did your story mapping. All of a sudden, scope is like 4-fold. What we do then is say, you guys still have only $500,000. Let's now identify phases for this product so that we'll still work within Fig's bid, but let's take some of those features out and just build out phases for release. And the acceptance stuff, right, that I told you guys? And they are presented with the re-estimated backlog for that phase 1. Like that's the actual product that they get for the Fig's bid. All right, so I showed this a little bit. Now, this has effectively trained your client now, and they have this realization on their face that this is going to be great. Like these guys actually know what they're doing, right? So again, you're building up trust, and your client is now becoming your advocate, because throughout this process, you're not only making sure that you're going to succeed, you're actually training a client how to operate within an Agile framework. And like 9 out of 10 companies we work with, they don't know how to do that. Even though they have their IT and engineers and so on, they don't necessarily use a proper approach to Agile. So they, all of a sudden, like, we'll have like product owners inside the companies to be like, we need to work with these guys more. We can change our process. We don't have to be outdated. You know? So you get advocates inside the company now. Now, we are distributed, but our practices are consolidated. So now I want to go back a little bit from training clients and process and so on to how do we ensure that our expertise grows and that we can kind of focus in on doing things really, really well. And when I say that, initially, when we started, when we opened up multiple offices, we had roles and kind of specialties for the team distributed all over the place. We had UX in Lithuania, we had UX in Chicago, we had front-end developers in both places, and so on and so forth. And it's a little bit challenging because you don't have these knowledge centers built out in those offices because they're kind of, there's a team that's installing new process for engineering here, but this other engineering team wants to do it in a different way, and there's no cross-pollination and things like that. So we strategically decided that we want people of the same kind of practice to be in the same physical space. So we decided that Chicago is going to just do UI, UX, and do product ownership, and then Lithuania is just engineering and QA. Because we wanted those teams to build out really, really deep expertise and be in locally so that they could make decisions locally on how they want to change process, how they want to adopt tools, and so on and so forth. You also have to have leadership locally for each practice. There's no such thing as remote people management. It doesn't work. There's no way that you can identify where a team is having a quarrel and from sitting in London and your team's in LA and you can't see him that this one guy spit on the other girl's food, and so that never happens. Right? So you need to be local to do a lot of things: optimize process, hire, train, onboard, look what the dynamics are, and so on and so forth. You also inspire, motivate, teach, and I can go on why it's important. I have multiple blog posts about why remote work doesn't really work. All right, but there's certain things that we also need to understand with Agile, right? I'm preaching Agile, it's great, but we also need to be aware of some of the limitations for Agile. Your client's not going to be better because of it. If they're unreasonable, they're going to be unreasonable, right? And you'll probably know this when you're going through contract negotiations and when you're doing onboarding. If they're rigid, they're not listening to you, they're not going to start listening to you once you start building the project, right? Nothing's going to change on sprint 2. They're going to be the same as they were. Budgets don't change. The same client will not all of a sudden have 4-fold budget. Schedule's still going to have a timeline built into it. And communication is still a problem. You still need to deal with it in any way that you would deal in a project. And obviously, the product's still not going to be automatically a great product. If they thought of a crap idea, it's going to be a crap software. So what are you going to do about that? So the reality of software then, when we know all of these things, right, there's still these 3 variables, this triangle of doom or whatever. All of these things are fixed, and we're in a fixed bid situation now, so something must give if scope changes or if time changes or quality, right? So what we try to do, we want to, throughout the process, we want to be completely transparent with the client. As we're working with them, we want to make sure that we're constantly just recommunicating everything that is happening throughout that project. So when we're going through the project, every 2 sprints, we're constantly going to re-estimate, even if it's a ballpark, right, it's a range, we're still going to be doing re-estimation, we're going to be reviewing velocity, we're going to be shipping them burn-down charts so they know how the project is progressing. Doing acceptance, right, as we talked. And it's very important that deviation is always going to happen. Even if you do all of this stuff up till now, it's still going to change. And that's why when I said that training for the client is critical, it's very important because your product owner is going to sit in a room with them and say, remember how we talked about this? Remember that backlog picture? This is why it's happening. You did this. You did this to us. Right? So your client, hopefully, by then is like, all right, you may have told me like once or 10 times before. So what's important is that the client happiness is dependent on reaching business objectives and staying in control, but not adhering to original scope or SOW. That paperwork is built because they don't have trust. They're unsure of how to do this stuff. So as long as you educate them and as long as you gain trust with that organization, it's going to be okay. Those negotiations, when your project kind of blows up a little bit and you have to change direction and things, it's going to go much, much better, and those negotiations are going to be smoother. So that's what we're trying to get to. Now, I just wanted to show you an example. This is one of the tools that we use throughout our project. It's an automatically generated report out of our system that shows the clients a lot of different metrics. We have like a high-level project status, which is green, yellow, or red. And that's pretty clear. They get a little summary at the top. If they don't want to look at the numbers, they get scared of numbers. And then below we have key performance metrics. And this goes from like, actual deliverable of scope versus planned scope, spend, deviation from spend, and then we get into other stuff like spend per category, spend per feature set, forecast of spend based on current backlog and things like that. When we do this, again, remember, we're communicating constantly, and we're always giving these reports to them every 2 weeks. This is where we are, this is where we are, this is where we are. If there's a problem, honestly, and if there's a problem early on in the process, you know right away, and the client knows right away. There's no hiding from failures. And sometimes you need to eat the cost, and that's okay. But at least when you're doing this, and if you are on target along the way, or if you're kind of creeping up like this right at the beginning of the project, you know what the trend's going to be, right? So the client knows that by the time they get to 100%, they're going to be exceeding their budget by, let's say, $100,000. So they still have time to course correct. But again, let's not get into too much theory here. Sorry. Let me get some audio in here. I want to show you guys a video. So this, watch all the lights go dark now. I'm going to plug this in. All right. I should have audio. So we have an application. We built this application for ourselves because we believe in our process and we think that transparency is key. So this application is actually something, it's called the Power Up app, and it shows the client how we're progressing throughout the project. So I'll show you a little bit of that. And
so, you found a trusted partner and resource for your development project needs. But we know managing it all can be quite a challenge. That's why we created the Power Up app. Track and manage your web, mobile, or cloud-based development projects with complete transparency. The Power Up app takes your client experience to a whole new level, giving you comprehensive insight on the status of your projects. Get to know your team. Whether your needs are small or on a larger scale, receive real-time updates on all of your projects. Get detailed reporting on all activities, and have quick access and easy control right at your fingertips. With the Power Up app, it's never been easier to retrieve information and to stay within budget wherever you are. Experience transparency and control like never before, on the go. Power Up today, available now at the App Store.
so this product, it's an internal product. We don't offer it to, it's not for sale or anything. It's something we built for ourselves because we've seen that like building trust with clients is so critical and important for us that we show within the application, this is actually the next release that's coming out, we show backlog, we show sprint plans, we show burn downs, they get the financials from there and so on and so forth. At any given point in time, they can see what each individual in the team is doing on a daily basis, on a per hourly basis. So we're completely transparent. And that leads me into measuring of performance. And I'm very close to being done, guys, so stay with me. All right, so performance for us as a company, right? It's important for us to ship on time. We want to deliver a quality product. And we also want to manage scope together with client. We know it's going to change, it's okay. So these are our performance goals. For the client, they're a little bit different, right? Because the client has different objectives than you. They're trying to build something for their business. So they want to meet business goals, stay on budget, and stay on time. Because that's what their CEO told them to do. They got a little bag of money. Here, go build the software, and it has to be successful, and it has to meet our business goals, and it has to be on time, and it has to be on budget. Right? Not an easy task, but... And then for the PMO within our company, for the PMO, their objective is actually to blend the two, right? So they're kind of an advocate of both sides. And they need to meet business goals by managing the team performance within a given time frame. And we look at these key metrics. This is the serious part of the conversation without no gifts, because performance is critical. So team utilization is typically, are your people actually working, right? So that's influenced by discipline and pipeline. So your sales and marketing have to bring you the pipeline of work to do, and your PMO has to make sure that there's like user stories and backlog and everything else, and requirements are clear and set. And then discipline of your team actually showing up to work and not sleeping in. And then effectiveness of work, and that comes from expertise. So that's why you train and teach and you build up your employees so they do the work faster and better within a given time frame. And then the last one, which is also critical for the product owner, is expectation management. And that's like that's the battle in the boardroom, right? The negotiations. That's where they pull out all their paperwork and I told you so, I told you so, I told you so. Hopefully you now are trusted and you guys are working and they like you and so on, and all of these are achievable because you are a proper, good development shop. So these are objectives for PMO. Now, within Devbridge, we actually track everything that we do. Every single thing that we do, we track. This shows the graph from the time tracked for our team, and we track max available hours to be logged, right? So we say max hours that people can log. Logged hours, billable hours, non-billable hours. So we want to know how much time we invest into sales activities. We want to know how much we're actually spending on projects that we're not getting paid for, because that happens if you make mistakes. It's normal. So we're tracking everything in very high detail, and we have Devbridge TV in the company, which also normalizes and shows those results to the team. We're completely transparent with everything that we do. And it's critical for us that we're not only transparent to the client through the PowerUp app, but we're also transparent to the team so that they know how we're managing our own results. Because at the end of the year, if the company benefits, we all benefit. So we show those graphs. Now, project performance data, and this is critical for anyone who's looking to grow business or manage business or make it better. It allows making very, very complicated decisions about the future of your organization and how you structure your process and how you work with your clients. And when I say this, I want to give you some examples, because by looking at those graphs and tracking our billable, non-billable distribution across design, engineering, by team, by member, and so on and so forth, we know how to price our services, because we can look at and say, you know what, this vertical or this industry is not that great for us because we always seem to deviate off base on them. We know how to compensate teams and individuals because we know how they contribute to the greater good. We know client performance, right? Because we know how a specific client behaves. If we see a tendency with the time and the billability of a specific client that's really bad, we know maybe there's a culture clash. Maybe we can't really work with that client anymore. So tracking that is critical. And what we've realized is as we have grown, and that's our vision for growth, we need to focus on scale and on large engagements, and those are only possible with Agile. There's no other way. So the only thing that we can do, because a lot of clients still expect fixed bid, fixed schedule, fixed price, the only thing we can do is we can train and we can get them to that point and kind of advance their process as we advance our own. Because if you think of scaling an organization and having a lot of employees and doing great work, you can't do $50,000 projects. You have to do large projects because there's simply too much overhead from managing small little engagements, and Agile is just not suited for it well either. All right, so let's summarize. So what we learned today here in this session is that Agile is not for every firm or every project, right? We qualify the team, we qualify the clients, we kick the turds, and we go on and build great things. Transparency and trust is a cornerstone of adapting new process, both internally and for your client, and for the success of the project, right? So your methodology of how you conduct yourself, how your leadership conducts themselves, how your salespeople sell your process and your company, all have to rely on trust and transparency. Because I honestly don't think that's possible with Agile, to not be transparent. And then metrics are critical in scaling, managing, and optimizing that process. Because without metrics, you're pretty much flying blind. And you may think your project's doing great, but it actually may not. So metrics are very important. So now, with all of that said, this is an Agile conference, we're kind of wrapping up. I want to wish you that with all this new knowledge, with all this new power, comes great responsibility. And I'll leave you guys with a quote. Read it and you'll figure it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurimas. And maybe any questions? Hands? Any? No? Oh.
Klausimus galit lietuviškai klausti, aš kalbu lietuviškai.
No, there are English-speaking people, so let's. You showed that you do story mapping with client with real sticky notes, no electronic tool. Even if you are not co-located, I assume, because.
No, so for our story mapping, what's important for us is that the client participates in this process. So if you use an electronic tool, you're going to sit them in front of a monitor, right? It's really tough. So our product owners and our designers, and sometimes our engineers will fly out to the States and they'll do the story mapping directly in the room with the client because a sticky note is much less, let's say, has a much lower threshold of technology adoption than, right? So that's why we do it that way. Now, after that's done, after we go through story mapping for, let's say, a release or like multiple sprints, that obviously goes into, Jira and whatever else you may use, whatever tool. Dar? Klausimų? Ten.
Question is about this Power app. It showed metrics above every developer head. Yes, looks like micromanagement.
No,
so
it's
maybe
not.
developers, when we work, we just see the metrics and start coding faster. The metrics instantly get better.
No, they're not metrics. They're actually, the numbers you saw, those are hours logged for a specific day. So if you click into a specific individual in the team, you can see what tasks they did, what Jira story it's mapped to, and like how many hours they spent on it. Because we want the teams to be accountable to their own leads and product owners, but we also want the client to see it, because if they're involved like defining user stories, we want to tell them, yeah, we worked, and we actually blew the budget by 2x on this specific user story, and we need to compensate somewhere else. It's not performance of that individual.
Here we go.
Hi, I have a question regarding selling the idea to make the prototype. Usually waterfall projects, those are governmental projects, right? So how do you make them, how do you convince them to spend 10,000 extra for something that might not be useful later on?
So the way we've seen this happen is, let's say we start from the beginning, from like point zero. You get an RFP, right? A government RFP comes in. You need to respond to that with something. You need to send them a proposal, an estimate, timeline, something to get that contract, right? So we'll start talking about doing prototyping. I mean, you'll be building a prototype for the project anyway. Whether you do it at the beginning and do a little bit of pre-work, or you do it throughout your regular sprints and prototype some stuff out, you'll probably do it. What our mission has always been is in the prototype, we'll put that in the contract and say, we're kind of going to lift this piece out at the beginning for you guys, because it's going to help us do things better later on. It's kind of like pre-selling R&D time. That's also pretty common in the industry. And when you do that, you can also say, you know what, let's not go overboard with the prototype, because we're building proof of concept. And like you said, we may not be able to use everything, so let's focus on the key value bringers. So like for an online banking project, we showed them how fund transfers would work, like, like checking and savings account management. We just built out that one piece, nothing else. So you need to convince them that there's going to be, a multiplier of value by going through this process, by learning it, by being able to bring that then to their stakeholders. And to be honest, I don't have experience with government projects. We don't work on those. We only do commercial projects. So, it may be tough, but.
Any more? We have some time. No? Okay, so thank you, Aurimas.
Thanks, guys.
Here you go, umbrella. Thanks. Riders, maybe you can come and say something.